All right, so today we are diving deep on Alfred Hitchcock's Blackmail. And
Yeah.
you sent over some film analysis excerpts.
Right.
And trust me, this movie,
Uh-huh.
it's way more than just like an early thriller.
Right.
We're talking
Okay.
murder, mind games,
Yeah.
and some seriously innovative sound
Well,
techniques for 1929.
really?
So let's unpack this.
What's really fascinating is how this film wasn't just a hit. It was actually voted the best British film of that year.
Wow.
And for Hitchcock, so early in his career, it really set the stage for what he would become known for.
So even before the iconic shower scene in Psycho,
Right.
he was already kind of messing with audiences' heads.
Absolutely. Take that opening scene, for example, with the arrest.
Okay.
The rapid cuts, the camera swirling around. It's not just action. It's Hitchcock putting you right there
Yeah.
into the frantic energy of the film. And he does that visually throughout Blackmail, using the camera to tell the story as much as the dialogue.
You know, it's funny you mentioned that because I was rewatching the 39 Steps the other day, and there's this chase scene that uses a similar technique.
Oh, yeah?
And it feels so chaotic, almost like you're running alongside the character.
Exactly. It's like a signature Hitchcock move.
Yeah.
Even in this early work, he's playing with that perspective and that feeling of being trapped, something that he would refine even more in his later films.
Right.
But what makes Blackmail especially fascinating is that it was made right on the cusp of this sound revolution in film.
Oh, right. It wasn't totally silent, but not quite a talkie, as they called them back then.
Right.
So how did Hitchcock blend those two worlds?
Well, this is where it gets really clever, because he uses sound almost like a weapon, specifically to torment Alice, our main character. Remember that breakfast scene?
Oh, yeah, after the murder.
Yes.
That was creepy.
Everyone's talking normally, but all she can hear is the word knife, just repeating over and over again.
Right, it's like her guilt is like this distorted soundtrack almost.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not just background noise. It's a direct line into Alice's fracturing mental state.
Right.
Hitchcock is using this new technology to explore a character's psychology in a way that really hadn't been done before.
Wow. So instead of just being this like cool new gimmick,
Yeah.
sound becomes this whole other layer of storytelling.
It does.
He was basically a pioneer.
Yeah, he was. And it raises a really interesting question.
What's that?
Does the shift to sound actually make storytelling more powerful or just different?
Right. Well, if you ask Alice, probably more powerful in a very terrifying way.
Right.
But that brings us to the woman herself.
Yes.
She is not your typical damsel in distress, is she?
Not at all. Alice makes choices that have very serious consequences.
Yeah.
Yeah, she kills a man,
Right.
but it's self-defense against this attack. What Hitchcock really digs into is how she copes with that act, the guilt, the fear that really eat away at her.
And he doesn't just tell us she's falling apart, he shows us.
He shows us.
I remember that scene where she's wandering through London
Yeah.
after the murder.
Yes. The city itself becomes this visual representation of Alice's mental breakdown.
Wow.
All those distorted reflections, looming shadows. London is almost a character reflecting her inner turmoil.
It's like those scenes in Vertigo where like Scotty's obsession with Madeline is reflected in the like swirling patterns and architecture of San Francisco.
Right.
Like Hitchcock clearly loved using setting to mirror his character's states of mind.
He did. And what's even more intriguing is that Alice's struggles also reflect something bigger happening in society at the time. The late 1920s were a period of such rapid change, both socially and technologically.
So you're saying Blackmail isn't just about one woman's crime, it's tapping into a broader sense of anxiety that people were feeling about the world changing around them.
Precisely. The themes of male aggression versus female vulnerability, the loss of privacy as technology advances,
Right.
all anxieties bubbling beneath the surface of society.
And it's wild that almost a century later, those themes still feel incredibly relevant.
They do. Yeah. As if Hitchcock had this uncanny ability to tap into these fundamental human fears that would just continue to resonate across generations.
Right, and that's why, even though it's an early film, Blackmail still has this power to grip you. It's not just a museum piece.
Right.
It's speaking to something much deeper.
Exactly.
But before we go too deep, let's pause here and take a closer look at how Hitchcock uses specific visuals to enhance those themes. He was a master of that subtle detail,
Oh, yeah.
wasn't he?
He was.
Okay, so we've talked about how Hitchcock uses these visuals, to amplify the psychological drama in Blackmail.
Right.
But there's this one scene that really takes things to another level.
Yeah.
The climax at the British Museum.
Oh, yeah.
It's not just suspenseful, it's visually stunning.
It's a masterclass in how to use setting to create that tension.
Right.
Hitchcock utilizes the museum's vastness, like those towering statues echoing halls,
Yeah.
to make the chase feel almost epic in scale.
Right.
And then there's that shot of the blackmailer Tracy clinging to the dome.
Oh man, talk about a fear of heights.
Right.
Like, you can practically feel him slipping as the camera looks straight down.
Right.
But I gotta admit, I'm a little lost on how they pulled that off back in 1929.
Right.
Didn't they use some special effect?
They did. It's called the Shifton process.
Okay.
And it was revolutionary for its time.
So what is that?
Essentially, Hitchcock used a combination of mirrors and miniature sets to create this illusion of this massive, sprawling environment.
So it wasn't just clever camera angles, he was like manipulating the sets themselves.
Exactly. He was blending reality and illusion seamlessly, which adds to the film's really unsettling atmosphere. The museum becomes this distorted, almost dreamlike space.
Yeah.
It's not just a backdrop. It's reflecting Alice's state of mind as everything around her feels like it's closing in.
Which totally connects back to those themes of paranoia and the feeling of being trapped that we were talking about earlier.
It does.
But what I find so fascinating is how he uses this visual spectacle to also touch on this theme that would become so central to his later work.
Oh, yeah.
Voyeurism.
That's a brilliant observation.
Thanks.
The fact that the climax takes place in a museum, a place designed for observation.
Right.
It's not accidental. We, the audience, become like those museum visitors peering into this unfolding drama.
Right.
Hitchcock makes us complicit in the act of watching, of being fascinated by somebody else's downfall.
It's like he's saying, don't pretend you're not enthralled by this.
Exactly.
And that's what makes his film so unsettling.
Right.
We're drawn in by the suspense.
Yeah.
But there's this like nagging sense of guilt
Yes.
about our own like voyeuristic tendencies.
Precisely. And it's a theme that he would revisit time and again.
Rear Window.
Rear Window, exactly.
Psycho.
Hitchcock understood that there's something inherently fascinating,
Yeah.
even disturbing,
Right.
about watching other people's lives unfold, especially when those lives are unraveling.
Okay, so we've got suspense, we've got mind games, we've got groundbreaking visuals,
Yeah.
and now voyeurism. It's like Blackmail is this blueprint for all the themes that would make Hitchcock a legend.
It is.
But we can't forget that this film was also made at this like pivotal moment in cinematic history.
You're right.
You know, the transition from silent films to talkies was a huge deal.
It was a huge deal.
And Hitchcock was right in the thick of it.
He was.
You mentioned earlier that Blackmail was actually shot in both silent and sound versions?
Yes. The studios were hedging their bets, unsure if audiences were ready to fully embrace talking pictures.
Wow. So Hitchcock was basically a pioneer
Yes,
in both sound and visual storytelling.
he was.
But how did that dual production affect the final film?
Well, the sound version is the one that truly shines.
Okay.
The use of sound, especially those distorted effects,
Right.
adds this layer of psychological depth that simply wouldn't be there in silence.
I mean, imagine that breakfast scene with Alice hearing knife over and over again if it were silent.
Yeah,
The impact wouldn't be nearly as powerful.
exactly. Sound allows Hitchcock to get under the skin of his characters,
Right.
make the audience feel their anxiety, their guilt.
Yeah.
It's not just a narrative device. It's a tool to manipulate emotions.
It makes you wonder, though, did the actors at that time struggle with this shift to sound?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they were used to conveying everything through gestures and facial expressions.
It was definitely a transition.
Right.
Some of the acting in Blackmail, especially Annie Andra as Alice, can feel a bit stiff compared to what we're used to now. It's
Right.
almost theatrical in style.
I did notice that, like, her delivery felt a little
Off.
off, almost like she was thinking about each word.
Well, there's an interesting reason for that.
Okay.
Annie Andra was Czech,
Ah!
and her English wasn't quite up to snuff for a talkie, so they actually dubbed her voice
What?
with another actress.
Whoa, they dubbed her entire performance.
He did. It was a common practice back then, especially when working with foreign actors.
Wow.
But it does create this slight disconnect
Yeah.
between what you're seeing and hearing.
Right. It makes you realize how much acting has evolved alongside technology.
It has.
But despite that, Andra still manages to convey Alice's inner turmoil.
She does.
You can see it in her eyes, the way she carries herself.
Absolutely. The fear, the guilt, it's all there, even with the dubbed voice.
Right.
And the male actors, John Longden as Frank and Cyril Richard as Mr. Crew,
Mm-hmm.
also deliver strong performances.
Okay.
even if their acting styles feel a bit more melodramatic compared to modern cinema.
It's like watching a stage play come to life on screen.
Yeah,
But that almost adds to the film's charm, don't you think?
it does.
It's this reminder of how far filmmaking has come.
It is.
But even with those stylistic differences, the performances don't detract from the overall power of Blackmail.
Real.
It's still a gripping story with incredible visuals and those signature Hitchcockian touches
Right.
that keep you on the edge of your seat.
Exactly.
Right. And speaking of those touches, let's dig into a visual motif that Hitchcock uses throughout Blackmail to subtly reinforce Alice's guilt and paranoia. Okay.
It's the motif of hands. So, before we were talking about that subtle visual motif
Right.
of hands that Hitchcock uses in Blackmail.
Uh-huh.
Can you elaborate on that a bit more?
Oh, yeah.
Because it seems like such a minor detail.
Yeah,
But knowing Hitchcock, it's probably loaded with meaning.
absolutely. Hands play a very significant role throughout the film,
Right.
often symbolizing guilt, responsibility, and that inability to escape the consequences of your actions. Think about that scene right after Alice commits the murder.
Oh, yeah, the way the camera focuses on her hands as she tries to wash the blood off.
Exactly. Her hands are trembling almost as if they have a life of their own.
Right.
They become this visual representation of her guilt,
Yeah.
something she can't wash away no matter how hard she tries.
And then later there's that scene at the artist's studio
Yes.
where that man keeps staring at her hands.
Yeah, it's like her hands betray her secret,
Right.
even when she tries to hide them.
Yeah.
They become a source of both fascination and fear.
Hitchcock uses these close-up shots of hands throughout the film,
Okay.
constantly reminding us of Alice's crime and the way that it haunts her.
It's amazing how he uses these like small visual details
Yeah.
to amplify the psychological tension.
Right.
You know, it's not just about what the characters say, it's what they do, how they move.
Right.
Even the smallest gestures.
Precisely.
Oh, yeah.
And speaking of tension,
Okay.
we can't wrap up this deep dive without talking about that infamous ending.
Right.
It's one of those classic Hitchcockian twists
Yeah.
that leaves you with more questions than answers.
So the blackmailer, Tracy, ends up falling to his death
He does.
during that crazy chase at the museum.
Right.
Justice is served, right?
Right.
But what about Alice?
Yeah,
He's
well-
left wondering if she'll ever be free from that burden of her secret.
That ambiguity is what makes the ending so brilliant.
Hmm.
Hitchcock doesn't offer us this neat resolution
Yeah.
or a clear moral judgment.
Right.
Instead, he leaves us grappling with these complex questions of guilt, responsibility, and whether Alice can ever truly escape the consequences of her actions.
It's like he's challenging us to consider what we would do in her situation.
Exactly.
Like, could we live with the secret or would it consume us?
Right.
It definitely makes you think.
It does, and that's what makes Blackmail such a powerful film, even almost a century later.
Right.
It's not just a thriller. It's a psychological study of guilt, deception,
Yeah.
and the ways in which our past actions can continue to haunt us.
And it's also a testament to Hitchcock's genius as a filmmaker.
It is.
He was pushing boundaries with sound, experimenting with innovative visual effects.
Yeah.
And exploring themes that continue to resonate with audiences even today.
Absolutely. Blackmail is a pivotal film in Hitchcock's career.
Yeah.
And a landmark achievement in early cinema.
Wow.
It's a film that deserves to be revisited and appreciated for its artistry, its psychological depth,
Right.
and its enduring power.
Well said. So what does this all mean for
Right.
you, the listener? I think it shows that sometimes the most rewarding deep dives aren't about finding like easy answers,
Right.
but it's about grappling with those complex questions
Yeah.
and appreciating the nuances of a truly masterful film like Blackmail.
It encourages us to look beyond the surface,
Mm-hmm.
to pay attention to those subtle details, and to engage with films that challenge us intellectually and emotionally.
Right. Yeah.
And who knows, maybe it'll even inspire you to go back and revisit some of Hitchcock's other masterpieces,
Yeah.
armed with a new perspective and a deeper appreciation for his craft.
That's what we love about these deep dives.
Yes.
You know, uncovering those hidden layers,
Yeah.
sparking new insights, and appreciating the power of film to make us think, feel, and question.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us
Thanks for having me.
on this journey into the shadowy world of Blackmail. Until next time.
Until next time, happy watching.